Around Kansas, brought to you by
Kansas Farm Bureau, the voice of agriculture. Go to kfb.org or find us on Facebook and Twitter.
Welcome to Around Kansas. I'm Deb Bisel. On November 30th, 1859, Abraham Lincoln crossed the Missouri River on a ferry. He came from St. Joe over to Elwood. And at the Great Western Hotel in Elwood, Kansas Territory, that is, he made his first speech in the Kansas Territory. It was all about slavery and how we didn't need to expand slavery and we should get rid of it. Now, he had gotten famous the year before with the Lincoln-Douglas debates over the Senate job in Illinois, but he had lost, of course, so he was not as big a deal as he might become. So he got some attention in the Kansas Territory. He visited Troy, Doniphan, Leavenworth, Atchison. In fact, he made some pretty significant speeches, a big long speech, a couple of hours in Atchison. Got almost no newspaper coverage while he was in Atchison, even though he had a good crowd and made a big long speech, because the newspaper editor, John Martin, who would later become governor, was a Seward man. He was voting for the other guy who was running against him, and he was determined he wasn't going to pay any attention to Abraham Lincoln. Now, while Lincoln was in Kansas, news of the hanging of John Brown reached Lincoln, and he voiced an opinion. He was quoted in the newspaper as saying, basically, while we can't condone slavery, neither can we condone John Brown's actions, and basically saying that he deserved the fate of hanging for the acts he had committed, and he was just a little overzealous in the actions he had taken to end slavery. Now, while he was in Leavenworth, he stayed with some distant relatives, the Delahays. The Delahays were Lincoln's cousins, and one of those little girls, Julia Delahay, who was just young at the time, she recalled how big Lincoln's shoes were, and just little details like a kid would notice when he came to visit. She went on to marry Thomas Osborne. She became Kansas First Lady during the Osborne administration. Many of the items that Lincoln used while he was visiting in Leavenworth at the Delahays are on display at the Frontier Army Museum on the post there at Fort Leavenworth. The Delahay House is a private residence, but those nice folks that own it are very proud of the legacy of the Delahay family, and occasionally they open that for tours in Leavenworth. So kind of stay on the radar with the Leavenworth home tours there, and you might have the opportunity to see it sometime. Another connection with Lincoln to Kansas, of course, is Grace Bedell, the little girl who wrote to President Lincoln and said that he really should grow some whiskers and he would look better. She wound up moving to Kansas later on in life, wound up in the little town of Delphos. For years, the letters hung on the wall in the Delphos Bank, where her husband was the president, and she is buried there in the cemetery at Delphos. Now, she was a little girl in New York when she wrote to Lincoln, and as he was headed to Washington for his inaugural, he actually stopped in New York and said, I believe there's a little girl that I need to see here, and she brought him a bouquet of flowers, and she actually got to meet Lincoln. Now, another really interesting Lincoln connection is up at St. Mary's College in Leavenworth. The only letter known to have been signed by both Abraham and Mary Lincoln is in the collection there in their archive. Just an incredible, really incredible artifact. So many Lincoln connections here in the Sunflower State. And Lincoln said one time, if I were to go west, I think I'd go to Kansas. We wish he could have come back.